An introduction to problem solving. This video will help you directly translate a written statement into an equation and solve a word problem that has two or more unknown values. Now let's take a look at some examples that will help you understand how to directly translate a word statement into an equation. Before we get started though, let's kind of take a look at some main points or good ideas anytime we're translating a word problem into a mathematics. One of the things, here are 4 things we want to make sure we include. We want to make sure that we always start with a variable statement, and that variable statement, all that does is identify what our variable is going to represent in the word problem. Then of course we're going to want to write an equation, we're going to want to show our solution process, and then we're going to want to have a complete answer. And all that means is we want to make sure we're answering the question asked. For example, in question 1 we're asked to find the number. So we want to finish our problem here with the number equals such and such. Okay? Now let's go ahead and take a look at example 1. The sum of 5 and 3 times an unknown number is 49 decreased by the unknown number. Now that is a mouthful. That is a lot of information, and it is too much information to kind of tackle at once. So what we do is we tackle it in small little phrases. So the first thing you'll notice is we're taking the sum. Well, the sum means to add. Well, when we add, we're going to be adding some things together. So we're going to read on to figure out what we're adding together. So the sum of 5, that's one of the things we're going to add, and 3 times an unknown number, that's the next thing that we're going to add. So let's see, the sum of 5 and 3 times an unknown number. Well, there's 3 times an unknown number. And I almost forgot here. Let's make sure we identify our variable statement that x is this unknown number. Okay? So now we have the sum of 5 and 3 times an unknown number is, that indicates our equal sign in the equation. Let's see, 49 decreased by, well 49 is going to get decreased by something, which means we're going to subtract something from 49. 49 decreased by the unknown number, and again our unknown number is x. So now I've translated this. Now I'm going to go ahead and solve the equation. Looks like I have variable terms on both sides. So I would add the smaller, get rid of the smaller one by adding x to each side. Let's see, 5 plus 4x equals 49. Okay, now my variable's on the left side, so I'll subtract 5 to get it all alone. So let's see, 4x then equals 44. Let's kind of come up here to finish. Okay, so now I want to divide by 4 to get x all isolated. So it looks like I get x equals 11. And we want to go one more step now and answer the question. In this case, it's not a very exciting thing. Find the number. Well, we just want to say 11 is the number to make sure we answer the question. We were not asked to find x in this problem. We were asked to find the number, so we want to make sure that we identify 11 is that number. Okay, example 2. A number increased by 12 is 4 times the number. And again, we're asked to find this number. So let's go ahead and let x equal the number. Okay, a number increased by. So we're going to start with our number, x, and now we're going to increase it, which means we're going to add something to it. Number increased by 12 is, there's our equal sign, is 4 times the number. Well, 4 times the number is just going to be 4x. There's our equation. Now we want to go ahead and solve it. Again, variable terms on both sides. Let's get rid of that smaller one. We'll subtract x, and we have 12 equals 3x. Divide by 3. And it looks like we get 4 equals x. So one final statement here. So we're answering the question. Looks like 4 is the number. Now it's time to check your understanding of direct translation. Go ahead and pause your video player and answer these 2 practice problems. When you're done, hit play to see how you did. Problem 1. 3 times the sum of 5 and a number is 48. Find the number. Okay, so again, we're just looking for this number. Not a very exciting thing, but we want to make sure we identify it, that we're going to let x equal this number. Okay? So 3 times the sum. Notice we're taking 3 times, but not just one thing. We're taking 3 times this whole sum. So if we want to take 3 times that whole sum, we need to put that sum in parentheses so that we're taking 3 times this whole sum. Now, what are we taking the sum of? We're taking the sum of 5 and our unknown number. Okay, so the sum of 5 and a number. So that's going to look like this. All right. A lot of times students would have just written this, 3 times 5 plus x. But notice, if we wrote it that way, we would only be taking 3 times the 5, not 3 times this whole sum. So again, that's why we want to put that in parentheses. Okay, going back to our translation, 3 times the sum of 5 and a number is 48. So let's see, is 48. Okay, there's our equation. Now we want to show our solution process. So I would distribute the 3. That would give me 15 plus 3x equals 48. Okay, and then minus 15. Uh, 48 minus 15, let's see, 33. Let's come up over here to finish. Divide both sides by 3. We come up with 11. And so now we want to answer the question, so we would say 11 is the number. Okay, question 2. 5 more than 4 times a number, is that number increased by 35? Find the number. Okay, so again, we'll identify our variable. Okay, now let's translate. 5 more. So to take 5 more than something, we're going to add 5 to it. 5 more than 4 times the number. So 4 times the number is just going to be 4x. Is, there's our equal sign, is that number, so again, that's our number, x, that number increased by 35. So if we want to increase that number by 35, it means we're adding 35 to it. Okay, now we go ahead and solve our equation. Get rid of the smaller variable term. Okay, subtract 5 from each side. So let's see, 3x will be left on the left side, 30 on the right side, divide by 3. Okay, and so we would say $10 is the number. Now let's take a look at an example that will help you understand how to solve a word problem when we have 2 unknowns. Example 3. The average life expectancy for an elephant is 24 years longer than the life expectancy for a chimpanzee. If the total of these life expectancies is 130 years, find the life expectancy of each. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff to take in. But what we notice here is we're asked to find the life expectancy of each of these things, which means we're trying to find the life expectancy of both the elephant and the chimpanzee. So that is 2 unknowns. So anytime we're solving for 2 unknowns, the first thing we do is we write down those 2 unknowns in words. Okay? So we're looking for life expectancy for elephant and the life expectancy of the chimp. Okay? So these are our 2 unknowns. And at this point in our math skill sets, we only know how to solve equations that have one variable. So we have to describe each of these life expectancies using just one variable. In this case, we'll use x. And so I've kind of given you a hint here that says make both of their values equal to x and then adjust to reflect the correct relationship. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, to start out, let's make both life expectancies x. And what that would say mathematically is that the life expectancy of the elephant and the life expectancy of the chimp are exactly the same. That's not the case. Let's go back to the problem and see how we need to adjust this just a little bit to make it so it reflects the problem. Okay? And so they give us a sentence up here. It says, the average life expectancy for the elephant is 24 years longer than the life expectancy of the chimpanzee. There is the relationship. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're going to say that the elephant is going to live on average 24 years longer than the chimp, which means we just need to take this one and add 24 to it. Now, we still don't know how long each of these animals are going to live, but we do know that once we find x, we're going to make sure now that the elephant is living 24 years longer than the chimpanzee. Okay, so that's always the first step. Identify your two unknowns, write them in words, and then go ahead and describe them using just one variable. We don't want to use an x and a y here because we wouldn't know how to solve. Okay, after we've got the two unknowns described, now it's time to write an equation. And most of the time with these two unknowns, it's a sum or a total in this situation. So notice here is the part that's going to help us write the equation. If the total of these life expectancies is 130 years, that is our equation right there. If the total of these life expectancies. So to find the total of these life expectancies, all we're going to do is this. Take the elephant's years plus the chimp's years to come up with this total. Well, let's go ahead and fill that information in. Let's start with a total because I think that's always the easiest. Together, they're supposed to live 130 years. That's our total. And now all we have to do is fill in the elephant's years. Well, we know that because we've written it right up here. We described it. We said that that was x plus 24. So x plus 24. And now we want to get the life expectancy of the chimp. Well, we know that. We wrote it right here. That was x. There is our equation. Now we can go ahead and solve this equation for x. So looks like terms on the left side here. X and x would give us 2x plus 24 equals 130. Subtract 24. And then we get 2x equals 106. Let's kind of come up here to finish. And we say, all right, 2x equals 106. Divide by 2. If we cut 106 in half, we'd get 53. Now, most of the time when we solve a problem, we find x, we're done. But that's not the case here. X is just a tool that we're going to use to find the answer to our two questions, our two unknowns. And x is actually the life expectancy of the chimp because we have it written right here. So we could say, if we look at this, that's how long the chimp lives. That's what we found when we found x. So we could say the chimp lives 53 years. Okay, and we can also use this x equal to 53 to find out how long the elephant lives. And so you notice there we have to take this 53 plus 24. Well, if I take 53 plus 24, that's going to give me 77. So we could say the elephant, 77 years. Okay, so here is our answer. Now we want to check this answer. There's kind of two requirements that we have to have. First of all, that the elephant lives 24 years longer. We've already taken care of that when we added 24 up here. The other thing that we want to make sure is that these two life expectancies add up to this 130. So over here, we'll come over here on some scratch paper and just make sure, this is our check here. Make sure these things add up to 130. If they do, then we'll know that we've got the right answer here. So let's see, 3, carry the 1. We get 6 plus 7 is 130. Sure enough, it works. So we've checked our answer, and we're confident that we've done this problem correctly. Now it's time to check your understanding for solving a word problem with two unknowns. Pause your video player and answer practice question 3. When you're done, go ahead and hit play to see how you did. Question 3. During the 2008 men's NCAA Division I basketball championship game, Memphis scored 7 fewer points than Kansas. Together, both teams scored 143 points. How many points did each team score? Okay, well, first thing we want to do is identify our two unknowns. So we want to say points for Memphis and points for Kansas. Okay, and again, we'll start out by setting them equal. We'll make them both x. That's not the case, but let's go ahead and set them equal. Now let's take a look back in the problem and see what the actual relationship was. And that's given to us right here. Memphis scored 7 fewer points than Kansas. So we want Memphis' score to have 7 less, basically, than Kansas. So all we'd have to do is for points for Memphis is subtract 7. You also could have just added 7 points to Kansas, but I think this is the easier thing to see, so I'll go with this kind of setup here. So let's see, we've got both unknowns described. Now we want to look to write an equation. And again, these are usually written as a total. And here it is right here. Together, both teams scored 143 points, which means if we add their points together, we're going to come up with 143. So let's see. Here are the points for Memphis. We already decided that the number of points Memphis scored was x minus 7. There's our points for Memphis. plus the points for Kansas, which is just x, has to now total 143. There's our equation. Now all we have to do is solve it. So let's see. It looks like we're going to have 2x minus 7 equals 143. Add 7 to both sides. 2x equals 150. Divide by 2. We'll come over here and we'll see that x then is 75. So we're not done yet. What we found is we found the points for Kansas, because that's what x is right here. So we found points for Kansas, so we could say 75 points. Okay, and now to find Memphis, all we're going to do is take 75 and subtract 7 from it. So if we take 7 away from 75, that'll give us 68. So then we could say Memphis scored 68 points. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at a practice problem with 3 unknowns. So this is really similar to finding solving a word problem with 2 unknowns. We're just going to have 3 unknowns in this case. So when we start, go ahead and identify your 3 unknowns, and then again, these things are going to add up to be a total. So go ahead and pause your video player and solve this practice problem, and when you get done, hit play to see how you did. Okay, problem 4. A 21-foot beam is to be cut into 3 pieces so that the second and third piece are each 3 times the length of the first piece. If x represents the length of the shorter piece, find the lengths of all 3 pieces. Okay, a lot of information going on there. We know there are some unknowns. Let's take a look. It looks like there's 3 of them. I've already told you that at the beginning, but if we read through the problem, we'll see that as well. You know, here's our first clue, that it's cut into 3 pieces. You know, we don't know any of those pieces. And it says right here too, find the length of all 3 pieces. There's a dead giveaway that we're going to have 3 unknowns. So let's see. Here's the first one. We'll set that equal to something. Here's the second one. Set that equal to something. And then finally, we'll take this third piece and set it equal to something. And they tell us in here that if x represents the length of the shorter piece, so we know one of these pieces is going to be the shorter piece, and we're going to call that x. So let's try to figure out which of these 3 is going to be the shortest. And I think that comes right here. So the 21-foot beam is to be cut into 3 pieces so that the second and third piece are 3 times the length of the first. Well, if the second and third are 3 times the length of the first, that means that first piece has to be our shortest piece. So we're going to call that one x. Now we know the second and third are 3 times the length of the first. Well, if the length of the first is x, then the second will be 3x, and the third will be 3x. Now that says, hey, these pieces are 3 times the length of the first. Now that we've got all of our unknowns described, now it's time to write their equation. And again, we're kind of thinking about a total here, so we know we got to have an equation. We know we got to come up with a total. The total is this 21 feet. Because we started out with this beam that was 21 foot long, and we cut these pieces out of that beam. That means if we added all these pieces back together, they're going to have to be 21 feet. And that's our equation. Add all these pieces back together, they're going to have to be 21 feet. So we'll take the first, plus the second, plus the third, and they have to add back up to this 21 feet. Okay, so there's our equation. Now we're ready to solve it. Let's see, x plus 3x is 4x. 4x plus 3x is 7x. Okay, divide both sides by 7. And we'll get that x equals 3. Okay, now we got to go back and answer the question. So it looks like what we just found is the first piece here. So we could say the first is equal to 3 feet. Okay, the second, well, the second is 3 times x. Well, 3 times 3 is going to give us 9. So the second is 9 feet. And the third is, again, 3 times 3 are 9. So 9 feet. So we've solved it. Let's go ahead and check. And the way that we check is we're just going to make sure this adds back up to 21 feet. So let's see, we have 3 and 9 is 12. Let's go ahead and check this. 3 and 9 is 12. And then we're going to add to that again this other 9. Well, 9 plus 12, sure enough, that's going to give us 21 to check this out. so we have confidence that we've solved this problem correctly.